Hi everyone, we've got two special announcements today. One's really good, and that is Ryan's not with us. He's Ryan's having new leather patches applied to his jacket because he's a professor, and that's what you have to do periodically, apparently. But one of my favourite guests is going to appear with us on the show today, and that is Joe Pine. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Colin. It's a pleasure to be here with you when you're Ryanless.
I'm Ryanless and rudderless because he's not here. Anything to do with the letter R. So for those of you that don't know Joe, I don't know where you've been for the whole of your life, but Joe wrote the seminal book on customer experience, the experience economy. Back in, I always get this wrong, Joe, I know it was
1999 was the book.
99. There you go. Yeah, so that was the original book. When I read it, I thought, bloody hell, this is really great. And the rest is history. So welcome, Joe.
Thanks.
A few weeks ago, I was chatting to Joe, and the great thing is that Joe and I have known each other ever since the beginning, basically, and we chat periodically. And I was reading one of Joe's articles, and we had a discussion on it on the podcast I few weeks ago. And then I thought, you know what, I should just reach out to Joe and let's get him on the show and talk to him about it. And I think you call it time progression, don't you, Joe?
Yeah, progression.
Yeah. So I think this is really significant, and I think that when you start to sort of dig down to some of the nuances of it, I think it is really an important thought. So I want to dig into that in a bit more depth. But for those of you that haven't read the article, and we will put another link in the show notes to the article. And for those of you that haven't listened to the previous podcasts, Joe, do you want to just sort of outline what the concept is?
Sure. And I'll give a little background that I don't normally do about where the concept came from, which is with my colleague Dave Norton, the founder of Stone Mantle and Insights Consultancy. And I work with him in these collaboratives to develop consumer insights and then help companies develop experience strategies off of those. And we've worked together since, actually in 1999, since the Harvard Business Review article came out, Welcome to the Experience Economy, in 98. He read that. He lived here in Minneapolis at the time. And we've been working together, periodically for ever since then. And he introduced this term to me once that he called experiences time well spent. We even wrote an article for Strategy and Leadership Journal, which I'm on the editorial board, about time well spent, and I thought, it's a nice term. I can see that it really is what experience is about. That because with experiences, what people do is they value the time that they spend with you, right? Sure. That's the key. It's time that they're buying. That's why you want to charge admission, or charge a membership fee, or charge some way of charging for time, because that's what your customers value.
Sure.
Eventually. Every company has to align what they charge for with what their customers value, and with experiences, that means time.
Sure.
And a number of years later,
and obviously time is like the most valuable commodity as well.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So I was going to save this for later, but I'll say that the way I like to put it is the most precious resource on the planet is the time of individual human beings.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's why understanding the nature of time in your business is so important. One of those options is time well spent, where you shift up to experiences, you engage people, you get them to desire to spend time with you, you want to spend time with them, and that's what creates that memory. And you therefore need to design the time so that you have a dramatic structure that rises up to a climax and comes back down again. Then. So 4 or 5 years after this, I was doing an engagement in Spain for Ford Motor Company, and it was for the announcement of one of their cars. There, it was a car that they didn't have the same model in the U.S. And I was working with, well, you may know these folks, Imagination in London,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That designed the original Guinness Storehouse and other things, right?
Yeah.
Great,
Yeah.
great company. So they've often hired me over the years to do speeches at special events for their clients and that. And this was one time. And one of the Imagination guys, Paul Cowan, before I went on, he talked about how it offered time well saved. And as soon as I heard that word come out of his mouth, time well saved, I immediately paired
Yeah.
it with Dave's time well spent. And I went, okay,
Sure.
now this really sings, right? Because it's to
Sure.
recognize that services are time well saved, right?
Sure.
Time well saved. That what people are asking you is do something for me, do
Sure.
something so I don't have to do it, right? I don't have to spend my time on it. I want you to spend your time
Sure.
on it. Do it better
Sure.
than I can do it myself, right? Even if you
Sure.
look at some services like legal advice, right? Well, I could always go to school and become a lawyer and then be able to do it myself, but it's like that takes way too much time. Let me give it to
Sure.
somebody who's already spent all of that time. And even many goods, we often talk about appliances in particular as time-saving devices and so forth, right?
Sure.
So the
Yeah.
bottom half of the progression of economic value about commodities, goods, and services is about time well saved, right? And in
Sure.
fact, people want goods and services to be commoditized, to be bought at the lowest possible price and the greatest possible convenience, so they can spend their hard-earned money and their hard-earned time on the experiences that they value, right? And that's that time well spent.
Sure.
Right, so you have this
Yeah.
basic dichotomy. In the experience economy, you may remember the tables we had with here's all the distinctions between all the
Yeah. Yeah.
economic offerings. Well, this is the core one. This is the one. This is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
one now that summarizes it all.
Sure.
Is time well saved versus time well spent.
And it always, I mean, whenever you and I have spoken in the past, I've always sort of said, well, you're a different sort of part of the market to me, in the sense that you're more on that time well spent part of the
Right.
market, and but the key is, I didn't articulate it like that. It was like I felt your stuff was more experiential, whereas my stuff was more operational and nuts and
Right.
bolts and
Right.
operational stuff. But it was when you, and I think this is maybe a year ago, when you said to me, well, the difference is time well spent and time well saved. And I thought, yeah, that's a bloody good way of putting it, basically.
Right. And
Yeah.
time well saved is great, right? That you're saving my time. It's a wonderful
Sure.
thing. I don't denigrate it at all. I'm just merely
No.
describing what it is. And in fact, most
Sure.
of what's called CX, most of making things nice and easy and convenient, and that new byword for CX that Shep Hyken loves, frictionless, right? Again, great
Sure.
stuff. But what it does is get you great services, right? And not
Yeah.
a true, distinctive,
Yeah.
memorable, personal experience.
No. And that for me is, as I've been thinking about it, is that, so you basically put convenience, frictionless, easy, under the banner of um, time well time well saved. Yeah.
Right.
So, because obviously the outcome of all of those things is you're saving time. The interesting bit for me was, and I started to think about this, I was thinking, I don't know, and I'll be interested in your view. I don't know of a company who measures customer time. So, they measure the hell out of how long the agent's spending
Right.
on the
Right.
phone.
Right.
They measure the hell out of how long it takes to do a delivery, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know anybody who could say that to place an order with us, to do raise a customer complaint, takes X amount of customer time, and
Right.
therefore, we should try to save that customer time, because customer time is valuable, as you've said, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that, for me, is just such a big bloody hole.
Right.
Have you come across any of that?
Well, there's one, not quite exactly what you're talking about, but close. A company that's gotten rid of measuring time in a positive way is Zappos, right?
Right. Yeah.
Zappos, the web shoe retailer and other items that
Yeah.
were bought
Yeah.
by Amazon for $1 billion many years ago.
Yeah.
They what in their call centers, what they do is they don't measure average handling time,
Sure.
right? AHT. They don't
Sure.
measure how little time we spend with customers. They don't.
Sure.
They don't think being productive is spending less time with customers. They
Sure.
recognize the value of spending time with customers because they recognize it's not a one period model. It's not about this phone call, right? This phone
Yeah.
call is
No.
part of a larger relationship.
Yeah. But if you revert, so I ranted on about a UPS delivery I had a little while ago. Okay. Well, actually, the reality was that I didn't have a UPS delivery. It was meant to come, but it didn't. Okay. But the only reason I raise that is because I think that UPS would be shocked if if I physically added up the amount of
Right.
time that I
Right.
spent trying
Trying
to
to track it
resolve
down.
that issue, you know? And it just made me think that, and again, we've spoken about, we've spoken about moving to a more sort of proactive experience. And when you start thinking about just that word proactive, okay, that hopefully means that you're anticipating what the customer's going to do, or will do next and do it before they even know about it. Okay.
Right.
Which results in, guess what? The saving of time. Yeah.
Right.
And therefore, becomes more valuable, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
But again, go on.
was it you can look at companies like McDonald's and many
Yeah.
others, started with banks and ATMs that moved towards self-service.
Yeah.
And they pushed activities, they pushed work onto their customers to get things done.
Yeah.
Menu ordering at McDonald's, for example, my wife and I were in the other day and just trying to figure out the menu since we're not used to it yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what it does is it commoditizes yourself, right? Because
Sure.
you
Yeah.
lose the human interaction, right? And
Yeah.
fundamentally, the experience economy is about human experience. And now we've lost that
Yes.
interaction with the teller. We've lost that interaction with the menu person. So my partner Jim
Yes.
Gilmore sent me early, I guess it was last week now, sent me a thing that somebody sent him about how menu an article in the New York Times, I think, about how QR codes
Oh yeah.
menus
Yeah.
are
I saw
being
that.
down,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he sort of said, it's just why is it why are they so bad? Basically, my basic response is they're impersonal, right? If
Sure.
somebody hands you a waitress or a waiter hands you a menu, right? You've had a personal interaction. You're touching the
Sure.
same thing at the same time, right? Which I want to.
Sure.
I don't want to overplay, but I want to say that is in fact significant, right? When one human being is touching one part of the menu, you take it
Sure.
from them. There is a human interaction, and when it's a physical menu, it happens twice, right?
Sure.
Whereas on your phone, now I also think menus are easier to read and that sort of thing, but that's a significant thing. And a lot of times when we want to say we're going to be more productive, and how we're going to be more productive, we're going to get our customers to spend time up instead of our people, is you're making it impersonal and you're commoditizing yourself and you're lessening the value that you create.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
One way to think about it is
Yeah.
I got this formula where the value you create and therefore the money you can charge is equal to the functionality you provide, whether it's commodity, goods, service, experience, what that basic functionality is, plus the net value of time.
Sure.
Right. And
Yes.
if you waste your customers' time by getting them to do things, then guess what? The amount they're willing to pay you goes down.
Yeah.
Right. And that's actually the bottom level in the progression is time wasted. Right. The worst thing you can do is waste your
Is waste
customer's
coach.
time.
Yeah.
And then if you
And
provide
that
time
goes
well
back.
spent, you get charged for the functionality, and time well spent, you can charge a premium.
But it made me also think that there are. So you know of First Direct over in the UK. It started off in telephone banking. They're renowned for providing a good customer experience. And I guess the point I was trying to get to is that there is then a difference between. So when you contact them, they train their people to sense how what's the word I'm looking for? How free you are or how
Ah,
willing you are to have a conversation.
right.
Okay, so I guess the point I'm trying to get to is the value of time can change. So we're both busy people. If somebody tries to pitch me on
Right.
something when I'm, just about to do this, I've got 50 million meetings in a
Right.
day, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to talk about it. Yeah. What First Direct do is they know that at weekends, particularly, that I'm personally going to be a bit more open to that type of thing. I've just got a bit more, time on my hands, etc., etc. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is it is also about understanding when a customer's time is more precious
Right.
than other times. And that could even, I guess, apply to life in general. A retired person's time
Yes.
is probably, you could spend 4 hours chatting to them,
Right.
whereas somebody that, a millennial with 3 kids or whatever it is,
Right.
their time's going to be more pressured, isn't it?
Right. There's a lot of anecdotes about elder people who are retired who, in fact, call into call centers just because they want somebody to talk to, right? And you get them on the line. You get those calls where
Yeah.
they're trying to tell you something and they won't let you go versus the other way
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
And
No, absolutely.
it's a human connection, and that's whether it's
Yeah.
over the phone, whether it's even in a chat, and or live. It's a human connection, and you're in the right spot, and yes, people value that.
So going back to, because there's a third aspect of this as well, isn't there? Which is, I think you called it time well invested. Am I right?
Yeah.
Is it time? So
Yep.
do you want to explain what
Yeah.
that is?
So actually, I call it the fourth act. So the fourth one, because at the bottom is that time wasted, right? And
Yeah.
obviously, it's a negative. You don't want to do that. When I draw it, sometimes I put a red
Sure.
line between time wasted and the other times, which are valuable.
Sure.
And so just to cap that off, just to know that that's again the time of individual human beings is the most precious resource on the planet. So you don't want to waste
Sure.
their time, but yet companies do it all the time.
Yeah.
In the U.S., my favorite example is you go to the doctor's office or the hospital, even the emergency room, and the first thing they do is they hand you a form to fill out of information they already have. Right? Why
Yes.
why are you doing this at this time? Right? Um,
Yes.
so you want to get beyond that, provide at least time well saved, right? Then the time well spent of experiences. And then the highest level is time well invested, as you mentioned, where people are actually investing their time to pay compound interest and dividends now and in the future, right? So these are not just experiences, these are transformative experiences. These are experiences that change me in some way, that help me achieve my aspirations. So
Sure.
this progression of time is an overlay on the progression of economic value. So time well invested corresponds to transformations, right? Services,
Sure.
experiences, transformations, right? The transformations, like experiences, are a distinct economic offering where you use those experiences as a raw material to guide people to change. Dave Norton and Jim Gomer and another colleague, Lance Betancourt, and I wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review last January, February called "The New You Business." And
Hmm.
it's about how do you help your customers become the new you, however they define that. What is that new
Sure.
you, and how do you get them to guide them? Is really the key economic functions. Like you deliver services, you stage experiences, you guide transformations,
Sure.
and basically any business in the business of helping people become healthy, wealthy, and wise is in the transformation business, right? And
Yeah.
needs to go beyond thinking themselves as services where they do want to spend those time. Healthcare, they think about how everything revolves around the doctor. The doctor's time is the most precious thing in the world. They're the precious resource instead of the patients. And so they revolve themselves around that. And what do? Is they waste people's time all the time. They even have what's called a waiting room, right? With the epitome of
Sure.
wasted, a waiting room, instead of
Yeah.
recognizing, no, let's invest this time, right? So,
Yeah.
so maybe there is some time where the doctor can't see them, but then how do we invest that time in their own health and well-being, right? That's a
Sure.
key thing. I just read
Yeah.
something yesterday about concierge doctors that say their appointments are generally an hour, not 10 minutes, right? Because they've greatly reduced the number of patients that they have, so they can spend the right amount of time with each one, and that's an investment in their health, not a waste of it.
Yeah, so that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. So you would put healthcare under, well, preventative healthcare. So if I go for a checkup or something like that, you would put that under time well spent, I presume.
Yeah. Well, even procedures in that is that I want to go from sick to well. Right,
Yeah,
that's the transformation I want. I mean, obviously, that's a generic one. You're going to have particular ones, but all of healthcare is basically about transformation. Whether it is to and it's not just preventing things, but it's to having well-being, or
yeah,
it's to recover from something bad that's happened, which often requires an extended time. Even things like, let's say, plastic surgery, right, where I'm just sitting there, I'm unconscious, and you're doing it, but I come out looking different, right? It is a new you,
sure,
even though it may be, we can often think of it as sort of a trivial thing,
sure,
but it's also the fact that what makes it a transformation is I have to learn to live in my new skin, sometimes
sure,
literally, right? Live in my new
sure.
skin, right? If I'm doing plastic surgery. And that's also where almost all healthcare companies and almost everybody in the transformation business falls down, is they end at the putative transformation without recognizing, no, you've got to continue on. You've got to ensure that that transformation takes hold, that it lasts through
Mm.
time. And that's where, like, where
Yeah,
I get comfortable in my own skin and so forth. That's
yeah,
part of the transformation process.
yeah. And I loved the when I read the article, I thought your example of the waiting room is such a great example, because I hadn't thought about it like that before. Um, and it just made me start thinking about other areas. I mean, both of us fly a lot, but if you listen to the airlines for long haul flights, you'd get there 3 hours before the plane takes off. And the amount of bloody waiting that happens
Right, right.
around all of that is just incredible. And it made me start to think of other examples of where effectively the organization doesn't care about your time. They're just more concerned with their own efficiency rather than anything else. And I guess a prime example of that is the classic yeah, somebody's coming out to fix the heating or the air conditioning, and they'll be there sometime
Right,
between 8 and 4 o'clock.
right,
You know,
right. You know
and
the old Russian joke.
no, what was that?
Well, a guy's air conditioning, right, falls out, and he calls the repairman, and he says, okay, I'll be there in August 14th, 2027. And he responds, morning or afternoon? He says, what does it matter? He says, well, I got the cable guy coming in the morning.
Yeah, classic. But again, I think it just goes back to that. The important part of this for me is it goes back to that mentality, and it goes back to the thought process of who is measuring customer time. And I don't and it makes me then think about that from an AI perspective, and it makes me think about it. So as AI becomes more and people use it to become more predictive, it makes me think that one of the key ways of differentiating yourself would be to try to start to understand how much time a physical customer is spending doing something, and what you could do to create a proactive experience.
Right. Well, I can give you a couple examples of that. So one, Carnival Corporation on their Princess lines has this medallion class, vacation experience they do, where they give every customer an IoT device. Right. So this
All
is
right.
it with the Princess logo on there, and
Yeah, yeah.
they call it the medallion. And with the medallion, it basically, like your phone, it knows where you are every time on the ship, right? So
Right.
you can always say, "Where are my kids?" Right, and boom, on the app, it
Sure.
tells you exactly where they are because they have their medallion. Um, but then it can track how much time they're spending in places, and they use that
Right.
as a proxy for time well spent. right? If you spend
Right.
more time in this activity than average, probably
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
like it better, right? It also could be
Yeah.
something bad happened and take you long, but probably you like
Yeah.
it better. If you spend less time, probably you don't like it as much. They can then make personal experience invitations to affect your mass customized itinerary of what you're going to do during your entire trip. And if you come
Yeah.
again, they can even set that better and learn even more
Yeah.
about you. So they do
Yeah.
have that time aspect built
Yeah.
into it. And then
Yeah.
also a friend of mine, famous neuroscientist Paul Zak, has a company called Immersion Neuro, and he uses Fitbit devices to effectively measure time well spent. Right? He calls it immersion. I would tend to call it engagement, but it's how immersed you are in the experience. Right? So it's like goes up and down. Right? If I'm engaged and lean forward, it'll have a high measure based on the blood flow with your arm, which correlates to what's going on in the brain. And then if I'm bored and sort of sit back, then the measure will go down. And you actually track, and you can track all the customers across and be able to figure out exactly what's going on and where do you need to spark something that would keep them going down to where they're not viewing it as time well spent. So there
Yeah.
are ways to be able to go about doing that.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure you have as well. But I've been looking into the whole area of AI, and
Right.
I was watching a video this morning, 200 tools on AI. It's just mind-boggling. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is, with all the data that you're referring to there, and you think of Apple AirTags and your phone, and blah 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 blah, that can tell exactly where you are and what you're doing, and and it just makes you realize how much data everyone's going to have and what they're going to be able to do with it. I
Right.
think the key issue becomes is, are they going to use it for just cutting costs, or are they going to use it to create time well spent,
Right.
or time well invested? And I have to say, my worry from the operational part of it is it's just going to go on the saving the organization's time rather than anything else.
Right, and that's because that's the mindset the executives go to. Right, let's
Sure.
save time, let's automate, let's get rid of people, let's lower our costs instead of thinking
Yeah.
about the value that they can provide. Dave
Yeah.
Norton and I wrote an article in the HBR Online in March on it's called Are your digital platforms wasting your customers' time? Right, so we've got that
Right.
aspect right in there, but we also talk at the end there about going from smart products to genius platforms. Right, smart
Right.
products that can sense and respond, particularly around one issue like my thermostat and so forth. Sometimes you get smartwatches that do multiple things, but how about a platform that connects to each one of those smart products, that understands the entire ecosystem, that does apply AI to not just sense and respond, but as you mentioned earlier, anticipate what it
Sure.
is that I want done, and then vastly multiply the jobs that it can do for me. Where it feels like it's giving me superpowers. Right, that's what
Sure.
they can do, and that's where I think we need to go. That's what for its access set of being on vacation on a cruise ship and on the land excursions. The Carnival's Medallion is a great genius platform. What can we do
Yeah.
with that in healthcare? What can we do with that in financial services?
Sure.
And one of the things it takes is going from all the generative AI that's going on right now use what's called large language models, or
Yeah.
LLMs, right? They're
Yeah.
basically scooping up everything that's on the internet, right? That's their large
Sure.
language model. But what if you train it on a personal language model? What if you train it on all of my personal interactions with companies, with other people, and then use that to be able to take all that vast thing and be able to customize it, to really individualize it down to me, and be my personal agent, be my personal butler in everything that I want done, my representative in the virtual world. I think
Sure.
there's scary possibilities there too, but there are greater possibilities for really enhancing that whole time progression. So it won't waste my time because it handles things that don't need my time. It provides time well saved by doing things for me, and then it offers that time well spent of knowing exactly what I want at this moment in time. What I want.
Sure.
From Amazon Alexa, right? Play some music. Well, where it plays music based, again, something you mentioned earlier, my mood, right? What's my mood at this moment? How
Sure.
much time do I have? It plays music
Sure.
based on who's there in the room. It's not just me; it's me and my wife, or our kids are over, or our grandkids are over. And
Sure.
what I want it to play differs each one. With
Sure.
broadcasters, what I want is I want one channel on my TV, the channel of what I want to watch right now. That's the only thing I want on there, right? And you figure out what that is, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I would like to get to.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, Joe, as we come to an end, we always finish off these podcasts with trying to get sort of a bit practical. So, if you were a listener listening to this, and if they went off and what bit of advice would you give them to go away and do? What would you
Well,
suggest that they
I
take
think
away
it's
and
what
think
you
about?
suggested. It's analyze the time your customers spend with you. Right, figure that. Do ethnographic research. Do consumer insights. Figure out what time are they spending you, and then how do they value that time on this progression from time wasted, time well
Yeah.
saved, time well spent, and time well invested. And if you
Yeah.
can move up that progression, you can create so much more economic value, and that will yield great value for your business.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I love the time progression. I think it's really good, but I think people will be somewhat surprised when they realise, particularly when things go wrong, the amount of time
Right.
that people spend on doing things. So
Exactly.
Joe, we as usual we'll put all the links in the show notes. But if people want to get hold of you, then how best should they do that?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn, or they can go to strategichorizons.com. We've got a link. You can send me an email, but you can find all information about me, about what we do, about our certification class and our frontline video training program. We've got a blog there called Thoughts that people can discover and read various ideas on, including the most recent one I did, I think, was on the background of the Genius platform idea, where that came from. Like I told you, the background of where the time progression came from.
Right. Great. Good. Yeah. And if I've been on Joe's certification courses back in the early days. Mind you, I don't think it was certification then, but I don't know. Anyway, but they're really worthwhile going on to. So I would definitely recommend those. So thanks a lot, Joe, for having you on. The bad news is that Ryan's back next week. But he has got some new leather patches, so we'll be fine.
All right. Thanks, Colin. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.